Okay, I think we're live. Hello, everyone. How's everyone doing? And please join me in welcoming Edward Snowden. Ed, can you hear us? Got the connection good?
I can. It's good to be with you.
Awesome. Well, why don't we start off just by looking back and spend about 5 to 10 minutes kind of doing a retro on what happened, on your action, on your disclosure, and everything that's happened since.
This is a good question. It's a big question, and it's difficult to kind of compress into 5 minutes. What we're talking about are years, decades, perhaps even centuries of history. But when we think about what happened, we need to think about where we are now. And the only way to think about that is to think about where we came from. Now, in the United States, we have a constitution, which includes the Bill of Rights, where we're basically specifying what the government can and can't do. Our model is what we call a government of enumerated powers, meaning if the government isn't explicitly granted the ability to do something, they're not supposed to do it. Now, why did this happen? It's because we are a country, a nation that was born out of a revolution against another government that had run out of control. And one of the primary grievances of this revolution was what the founding fathers described as general warrants. Now, this is one of these things we might have heard of in social studies class, but what does it actually mean? It means that the government of the day, the sort of British Crown, would write these orders that would then tell the police, they would tell the military, they would tell whoever, that because of this threat to society, threat to the state, threat to stability, because of political radicalism, because of dangerous people who were living within our societies, they could go and investigate the lives of anyone who they thought could be attached to this perceived wrongdoing. They didn't have to name who the suspects were, right? They didn't have to say, it's this person, we have this evidence to think they did some crime. Instead, they go, look, to thwart terrorism or whatever, we're going to give you a blank check to start looking into the lives of everyone to stop that. Now, when you fast forward to the modern day, of course, we have restrictions against that. The Fourth Amendment of the United States prohibits explicitly this kind of activity. The Fourth Amendment being the one that prohibits what we call unreasonable search and seizure without probable cause that you've done anything wrong. Now, this all sounds super lawyerly, right? But what it means is the government can't investigate you. The government can't look into your life. The government cannot monitor you. Even if they pass a law that says they can, that law has no effect because the Constitution is the supreme law of the land in the hierarchy of laws. But what it basically means is that as long as there isn't concrete evidence that you've done something wrong, you're supposed to be left alone. And this is why in our language, we have sort of two broad classes of participants in society. We've got private citizens who are supposed to be left alone, very little supposed to be known about them. And then public officials. These are our elected representatives, sort of high chiefs, who are the ones carrying out the government's will and supposed to be representing us. We need to know what they're doing. We need to understand what their policies are. We need to see their tax returns to make sure they're not corrupt and so on and so forth. But this was the problem. Everybody who worked for the CIA, everybody who worked for the NSA, our secret agencies, had signed up on the very first day and made to swear an oath to say they'll support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic. That means not protecting a particular official, not swearing allegiance to a president, but to this system of ideas, the system of values, our constitutional rights. Make sure those aren't violated. And unfortunately, in the response to 9/11, in secret, we got off that track. All of those sort of sacred oaths, all of those constitutional protections started to be degraded in secret. We had court decisions in the very beginning of 2013, where the American Civil Liberties Union, representing Amnesty International, a primary human rights organization, said, look, people are being spied on in exactly this way that's prohibited. We went through all of the proper channels, right, to go, the courts need to hear this. The courts need to see if this is legal or not legal. And the court said, we can't tell you whether it's illegal or totally legal because you can't prove it happened. There's suspicion that maybe this kind of new surveillance is happening. Maybe the government's using the internet to watch people. But it's an allegation. It's a conspiracy theory. And then we went to Congress, our second branch of government, and said, is this actually happening? We got the most senior member of the intelligence community. This is sort of the boss of the NSA, the CIA, the FBI, all of that, under oath, and said, are you actually spying on Americans in a famous exchange? And it looked something like this.
Does the NSA collect any type of data at all on millions or hundreds of millions of Americans?
No, sir.
It does not.
Not wittingly. There are cases where they could inadvertently, perhaps, collect, but not wittingly.
Right, so that's the legal setup, and nobody's really interested in that because they go, oh, laws, this is kind of abstract, and it's a little bit of an argument here. But the problem was that was sworn testimony. That individual who was rubbing his head swore that he would tell the truth under penalty of law. It's a felony to lie there, and in fact, he did lie, and I saw it, as did my coworkers, and I said, "Is this right?" We are actually doing something very different. And this is what came forward. This was eventually revealed through journalists. This is something that people don't understand. They think, oh, Edward Snowden released all of these secrets. He revealed all of these documents. The number of secrets that I made public is actually 0. I've never published a single thing online that says this is a classified program, this is how it works. I provided evidence of these kind of activities, these mass surveillance activities, to journalists. The most trusted institutions in our media, the Washington Post, Der Spiegel, the US Guardian, and these institutions were supposed to take my political bias out of the equation. And they would decide, are these things that this guy is alleging on the basis of these government documents, which are classified, but do appear to show violations of law, are these things the public should know? We're not going to let him decide if the public should know. And I did this intentionally. I required them to hold this sort of standard there. Instead, the newspapers will decide, does this actually show violations of our understanding? And it did. In the very first days of June, we saw that the National Security Agency was intercepting the phone calls and making records of the phone calls of everyone in the United States, both American citizens and foreign nationals, without regard to whether or not they had done anything wrong. If you picked up the phone and you dialed a number, you were making records in government databases. And it went further than that. It went to the internet. This is the famous slide that most people remember for a program, secret program of the National Security Agency called Prism. They worked with the FBI to sort of conceal from these companies what they were actually doing. Google, Facebook, Apple, Skype, all of these guys were going beyond what the law required to give the government information off of their servers. The government didn't have to steal this, which is the traditional way that they would do things, what's called upstream surveillance, where they would tap fiber optic cables, they would go to AT&T, they would go to Verizon, they would go to Comcast, and they'd say, everything that rides over your networks, we want a copy of, we want to take a look at. But under this Prism program, the tech companies were actually collaborating. Now, something interesting here is you'll see that Twitter actually wasn't one of those listed there. But it went on. What were they using these things for? How far were they going? As the journalists dug in further and further, they saw that they were spying on people's pornography viewing habits to discredit their politics, right? Now, in this case, this report, we are talking about people who followed an Islamist ideology, but the NSA's own reporting, and this is the top secret level, found they were not associated with terrorism. They were not promoting violence. They just didn't like their politics. We saw that this wasn't just the United States. It was part of what was a larger Five Eyes surveillance network. Five Eyes being the United States, the United Kingdom, Australia, New Zealand, and Canada. where if you had a webcam sitting in your bedroom and it had a certain type of messenger program open on it, this is Yahoo Messenger from a few years ago, every 5 minutes, they were capturing a copy of that image, even though they knew it had people naked, even though they had intimate moments that had nothing to do with terrorism, that had nothing to do with criminal activity. They were saving it. We saw that our Australian friends were using these same methods of internet surveillance, of indiscriminate dragnet surveillance, to see what journalists were doing. They were using these surveillance capabilities not to save lives, not to stop terrorist plots, but to actually figure out who the sources were of newspaper stories that they didn't like. We saw that they were using these capabilities for economic espionage. They were spying on US attorneys who were negotiating trade deals, not about nuclear weapons or uranium prices, but over shrimp and clove cigarettes. They were saying that clove cigarettes were a matter of national security. It went to infrastructure. The chips that were in your phone were having secrets stolen from them at the place of manufacture. Our allies, countries that are not enemies, but the national telecommunications infrastructure, places like Belgium, right? Belgium, not exactly a very dangerous place. We were breaking into their telecommunications facilities, even though we had legal alternatives, even though we simply could have asked the Belgians to give us the information that we needed. We went, that's a little bit too difficult, that's a little bit too complicated, so we're just going to do it ourselves. And what did this mean in total? This meant that without Americans' knowledge, without our consent, our rights had been changed. Our Constitution had been departed from in secret, and the courts did not know about it. If you rewind to that moment where I said in the very beginning of 2013, in February, March of 2013, the Supreme Court of the United States said, this sounds sketchy, but because you can't prove it's happening, we can't say whether it's illegal or whether it's lawful or unlawful. By the end of that year, when the president had come out and said, there's nothing to see here, don't worry about it, the NSA isn't listening to your phone calls, the courts said something, in fact, very different. The courts said, this is actually illegal. And not only is it illegal today, it's been illegal for more than 10 years. The government has gone beyond what is permitted. They have violated the rights of everyone in the United States. And the United Nations found that they may have violated the rights of everyone in the world. And I could go on, but when we talk about what the core question of what happened back then versus what happened now is, in a democracy, the idea, the basic fundamental idea is that power is derived from the public. The government's legitimacy, right, their very power to govern is not given by, God. It's not descended from an agency. It's not descended from their lineage. They're not royalty or anything like that. It's granted by us to represent us, to carry things out on behalf of our intentions, our ideas. But this idea, the legitimacy of the government being derived from the consent of the governed, only works if people actually know what's going on. If we're being asked to vote and we don't know what government is doing, we are no longer a democracy. Rather, we're something very different. We're a government of secrets.
Sorry. What's changed since your disclosures, and what are you most proud of?
I think where we start on this, because this is, again, too big of a question to answer in an immediate thing, is when I came forward in June of 2013, the government sort of responded like a singed cat, walking across the stove. They flipped out. They said everyone involved, including the Washington Post, right, is engaged in some kind of treason. They're damaging the country. This is a very scary thing, and people are going to die because of it. And this was because the government's wrongdoing was exposed. Reputations were on the line. The president himself came out and said, this is a lot of heat. There's no light here. There's nothing to see here. Sort of move on with it. We've drawn the right balance between your rights and what the government wants to do. Don't ask so many questions. But as the reporting continued throughout the year, as the courts finally came forward and actually said, look, we're on the government's side here. We're not radicals. We're not trying to handcuff the government or anything like that. but they have gone too far. They have broken the law. They have departed from what the Constitution requires of them and American democracy, and things need to change. The president himself, by the beginning of the next year, changed his tune. He said that, look, this conversation, while it was uncomfortable for the government, while it did embarrass a lot of people, made us stronger as a nation. And just about 1 month ago, he was asked about this again, and he said that what I did and the reporting that these journalists carried out raised legitimate concerns, things that every American should discuss and everyone should care about. And the Congress of the United States, which again has a fairly low opinion in the eyes of most Americans, I think opinion polling now says it's somewhere around 9% of Americans approve of how they work, actually passed new laws saying that, in fact, these, forgive me, I've lost my my model here. We passed the first significant reforms to U.S. intelligence laws that restrict their violations of American liberties rather than expanding what they can do in more than 40 years. The last time the intelligence community was recognized as breaking the law was in the 1970s. It was when they were spying on people like Martin Luther King Jr., who they classified as the greatest threat to national security in the United States, and trying to get him to commit suicide after he won the Nobel Prize, because, again, he was damaging their reputation. He was sort of hurting their narrative. And what we're talking about here, and what we're proud of, is the idea that when we know what's going on, when the public understands the operations of government, we're not harming government. We're improving it. And if even the government, right, who is the most embarrassed by their law breaking, the president who's saying, hey guys, don't pay attention to this, the Congress who's being lied to in that testimony we saw, and the courts before that went, this is a conspiracy, don't really listen to that. When all three of those branches of government 6 months later say, actually, you know what, they had a point, and if we don't do something about this, we will be living in a country that is not only more surveilled, not only less private, but one that is actually less safe, less free, unless we reform these things. I think that's something that not only I am proud of, but every American should be proud of.
What's your view on the state of journalism and journalists, and what needs to be improved?
This is, well, journalists have a tough job. There aren't a lot of people who go into journalism and get rich. There are big broadcast news anchors who make millions of dollars. But when you open the newspaper, right, the people who are doing the regular day-to-day reporting, who are actually finding the truth and holding the government to the account of the public about what is right and wrong, right? When we stop talking about just what is legal, what's illegal, but talk about what we should be doing, what we shouldn't be doing, things that might be lawful but are still heinous, they're violations of simple justice. These aren't people that are getting rich. These are people who are doing the job because they believe in it. These are people who are trying to let us know the truth of our world, even when really powerful figures, really rich figures, whether they're corporations, whether they're government, whether they're foreign agents or whatever, are trying to hide this. It's a noble effort. But there is a sad thing that's happening in journalism right now, where it feels a little bit like the truth doesn't matter so much anymore. You get real news stories that are well reported, that go out there, and nobody in the sort of Twitter realm retweets them. They see they're not that interesting. They don't make you jump out of your seat. But if you put something crazy out there, something that does make people argue about it, something that does make people be offended by it or interested in it or go, is that true? They will share it. It will expand. People will talk about it, even if it's not true. But this brings up sort of this central argument that we have right now about this fake news idea. And there's been responses that I actually think are quite negative here, where people go, all right, there are people out there on the internet who are lying. They're making up stories. They're spreading falsehoods. So we have to do something about this. And what are we going to do about it? Well, in the United States, we have a constitutional amendment that prohibits the government from regulating speech, right? Free speech, the First Amendment. The government can't tell you what you can and can't say. You can actually go out on the internet and lie, and the government can't do something about this in a broad sense. So they go, well, we still want something to happen. Let's make the companies do this. And they always start with the most offensive type of ideas, right? Where we're not talking about speech in general. We're not even talking about fake news in general, but we're talking about things like terrorism, right? And they go, we're going to take down terrorist content. We're going to get all these companies, Google, Facebook, Twitter, whoever, to come together and make a database of what we think is terrorist content. And then these companies will take it down. That sounds reasonable, right? That sounds like a good idea. That sounds like something we can all get behind, because nobody wants to see ISIS recruiting on the internet. That's a very bad thing, and we don't want to support it. But at the same time, there is no common definition of terrorism that's recognized around the world. The government of Turkey right now, which is incredibly authoritarian, incredibly repressive, considers their political opponents, anybody who criticizes them, to be a terrorist group. So what happens when they start saying, this is terrorist speech, these are our opponents, you have to take this down because these are terrorists saying it? We need to make sure that our best responses to lies, the problem of fake news, isn't solved by hoping for a referee, but rather because we as participants, we as citizens, we as users of these services help each other. We talk and we share and we point out what is fake. We point out what is true. The answer to bad speech is not censorship. The answer to bad speech is more speech. We have to exercise and spread the idea that critical thinking matters now more than ever, given the fact that lies seem to be getting very popular.
So you joined Twitter in 2015. Just why? What were you looking for?
You know, it's a really complicated story in one way. It's a really easy story in another way. It gets back to these ideas of fake reports, right? If you are the one person out there who actually knows what's going on, what's true and what's not true, and you see these fake reports coming out, in my case, they're reports actually about me. You want to have a voice, you want to say something. But in the traditional media game, for people who aren't very familiar with how journalism works on sort of the back end, some story will come out there. It'll be about you or anybody else. And nobody calls you, nobody asks you if this is true or not. It just happens, it just pops out there. And if it's not true, you have to actually sort of write a statement. You have to go, this is fake, this is why, here's the evidence, here's the proof. You send it to this news outlet. You hope they correct their story. Sometimes they won't. Even if they know it's not true, they won't correct it because it's a popular story. Again, the incentives here are a little bit broken. But what if you could tell your own story? What if you could immediately get it out there? What if you didn't have to wait? What if you had your own voice? What if you had your own platform? This is the beauty of the internet, is that everybody is able to participate. Everybody is able to share. Everybody's able to broadcast. And you can be judged on the basis of your ideas. Can the facts that you put forward be confirmed? Is this stuff actually real? And when it works as intended, it's beautiful. This is one of the amazing things out there, because even if you're facing sort of the most corrupt and powerful bureaucracies in the world, you can still be heard. Maybe not by everybody, but by an extraordinary crowd. And this is something that I've seen again and again in the story of Twitter. The more I use it, the more I respect it. Because Periscope, right, the service that we're using right now, it's great that you and I can have this conversation, right? But both of us are fairly well known at this point. People who aren't well known, when I was watching Periscope just last night to try to familiarize myself with the service, there were protesters in Turkey on the street who were making sure that they were noticed, who were making sure they were heard, who were making sure that they had a witness in history to what was actually happening. Because as long as you had a phone, suddenly you had a voice.
So your usage of Twitter is very interesting because you follow one account, and that account is the NSA. A lot of people use Twitter to get their news, and I don't imagine you're getting a lot of news from the NSA. So how how do you use it every day? How do you learn from it? Do you get your news from it? Do you just use it as a microphone and to have conversations?
I actually do use it to understand what people are saying, what they're thinking about, what they're talking about, where the conversation is going. But I don't use it so much on my named account for that, because right or wrong, the US government considers me sort of a fugitive. I've been forced into exile as a result of my political ideas. Now, this means that whether we like it or not, there are courts in the United States that will say, look, let's get a warrant for his communications. And I don't know whether this is the case. Maybe you do, maybe you don't. I'm not trying to put you on the spot here. But the government could come to Twitter and say, look, we need records of everything this guy is saying in his private messages. We need to see every link that he clicked on. We need to see how he's using Twitter. And I don't think that would be fair to everybody that I'm following, everybody that I'm connected with, everybody that I'm interested in, to have them lose their privacy simply because they were interested in talking to me or I was interested in talking to them. So instead, I have sort of a very crude way of using Twitter, which is I look at what people are saying and I try to actually remember their handles. I try to remember their names and then I go to it manually. I could create sort of alternative accounts and create lists of people incognito. But what has surprised me is even if you don't use Twitter to the fullest extent like that, where you have the beautiful user interface and everything like that, it remembers all of this stuff for you, it presents their tweets, just how much value you can get out of it.
What would you like to see us do? What would you like to see us improve to serve you and to serve the world better?
You know, one of the main things that I've seen recently more and more is as Twitter has tried to expand what you can fit into tweet, which I think is an important effort, right? Particularly when we're talking about content. The fact that when you add a picture to a tweet, you lose 22 characters, that's painful. That's honestly, that's terrible. If you could recapture that when you add a link and things like that, you don't lose those character counts. That would be useful. And you guys have done a lot of work to try to fix that. But the problem is now in many different clients, when people use mobile, when people use a browser this way or that way, suddenly the clicking through actions don't work anymore, right? It takes you out of the Twitter client. It takes you into a web browser or something like that. It breaks sort of the user experience there. And that for me is a challenge that, you know, it might not seem very interesting. It might seem like one of those small things where it's like, oh, that only affects some tweets. They're really big. They have a lot of characters in them. But I think that kind of unified, integrated experience really has an impact. People don't like seeing the window change. People don't like waiting for a new thing to change. It should be inline. It should be in stream and stop breaking you out into other sites. The second thing there is there's a lot of controversy about editing tweets, apparently, which to me is kind of surprising. But when I think back on it and other sort of technological products that have had these kind of challenges about should you edit this or should you make it where when you put it out there, it's out there, it can't be changed, decisions, the risks, I do understand, right? Okay, let's say you can edit tweets. You put something out there that says, I believe this. It's a very popular opinion. And, you know, 10 million people out there, they all retweet it. They've all got it sitting on their timeline. And then you edit that tweet. And now you say something terrible or that's completely the opposite. And everybody has that on their timeline. Now, look, this is... Twitter's been around for a while. People understand the idea that retweets are not endorsements in a formal sense, but a lot of people still ignore that. They still think if you're retweeting something, it's something you agree with, it's something you believe in. And that would upset a lot of people. But surely there's got to be ways around this, right? Surely there's got to be a way that you can tag it as edited. If you click on the edit tag, you can see the previous versions of the tweets and things like that. There's got to be some way to fix it out there. But just to correct things where people put a tweet out, it gets shared, And then they realize, oh, I made a typo in it, or oh, that wasn't exactly what I meant to say. I want to tighten that up. Or now that 10,000 people saw it when I expected 10 people to see it, I want to be a little bit more careful in how I say that. I want to be a little bit more clear. I think those are all things that would provide a lot of value. But I wouldn't say I'm actually an expert on Twitter. So you probably got better ideas than I do.
Thank you. Two more questions, and then I'll take some questions from Twitter. We have a new U.S. president taking office January 20th. And how are you thinking that will affect your current situation?
You know, a lot of people have asked me, is there going to be some kind of deal where Trump says, hey, look, give this guy to me as some kind of present. Will I be sent back to the United States where, I'll be facing a show trial or things like that? Is this going to happen? I don't know. Could it happen? Sure. Am I worried about it? Not really. Because here's the thing. I am very comfortable with the decisions that I've made. I know I did the right thing. The institution of journalism believes that I did the right thing as well. These stories that came out received the Pulitzer Prize for Public Service. This is the highest prize in journalism. We know that no lives were lost as a result. No harm occurred to the United States or any individual as a result of this reporting. And that's not coming from me, by the way. That's coming from the White House. The President of the United States put forth 2 independent reviews that had people like the former deputy director of the CIA, not exactly liberal reformists, who found that this kind of mass surveillance, this kind of unlawful, unconstitutional surveillance that was happening in secret, actually wasn't effective. It wasn't stopping terrorist attacks. In fact, even when they looked at all the classified information, they couldn't find a single instance, not even one, in more than 10 years of operation, where these programs stopped a single terrorist attack. Moreover, even if we lower the bar, right, did it even help in a counterterrorism investigation? They said no. They couldn't find a single instance where it contributed to the discovery of an unknown plot. So when we look at that, we go, well, some people still consider me to be a controversial figure. Why is that? What is the criticism against me? And people go, well, he's in Russia, right? So he must be a Russian spy. They skip over the whole part of how did I end up in Russia, right? I didn't choose Russia. I never intended to be in Russia. I was actually traveling en route to Latin America, where I would apply for asylum. I applied for asylum in 22 different countries around the world, or 21 different countries around the world. Places like France, like Germany, like Sweden, like Norway, right? These aren't enemies of the United States or anything like that. And every time it looked like one of these countries would try to support me, anytime they would try to uphold the right to seek and enjoy asylum, which is a human right, by the way, that the United States has recognized. We actually built this right in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, which under US law context are actually equal to constitutional rights. These aren't normal laws, right? Treaty obligations are considered to be equal in standing to the Bill of Rights. But so when I tried to leave Russia, or actually before I even got to Russia, the Secretary of State, John Kerry, canceled my passport, making sure I couldn't leave. Why did they do that, right? If they say they're afraid of me being in Russia, and by the way, I didn't have any documents with me when I came to Russia. I destroyed them before I got here. Specifically so, I couldn't be tortured in giving them up. They couldn't be stolen, nothing like that. The journalists were the only ones who had this material. But anyway, they trapped me in Russia, the United States government. And we have to wonder why. Is it because this was a kind of political criticism that they thought would stick? They can't defend the NSA's programs, right? We know these things are unlawful. The courts have said they're unlawful. But if they can raise suspicion about me as a person, maybe people will start to think these programs were okay or forget about them entirely and instead focus on me. We don't know that, but we do know When there were, it looked like opportunities where the government could have let me go to Latin America, go to Ecuador or someplace like that, go to Bolivia. The United States actually grounded the plane of the president of Bolivia, which is a violation of international law. They forced it to land so it could be searched to see if I was on board. Anybody can search for this and find it out. It's called the Evo Morales incident. To keep me in Russia. If the government were at all worried about the fact that I was in Russia, would they be trying to keep me there, or would they be trying to get me out as quickly as possible? So despite that, despite the fact that it's pretty obvious that I'm not playing ball with the Russian government, in fact, I've criticized the Russian government's human rights record, their internet freedom policies, in a way that's probably made me far more enemies than friends. We have this new narrative that, hey, Donald Trump will give him up. I say I'm not that worried about it because, yes, although this would be a terrible violation of human rights, it's one that would be unique to me. And it would prove once and for all the fact that all of those allegations that this guy's a Russian spy aren't true. If the Russians are saying, I'm a critic, we're kicking him out of here, and it actually happens, that's probably the greatest vindication I could ask for. And just my final word on that is that people ask, how can you say, right, that you'd be okay with that? Well, I'm not okay with that. But that doesn't mean that I can't accept it, right? Because if my own personal security was the only thing I cared about, if I was looking out for myself, I never would have come forward and said that the NSA was breaking the law. I never would have put myself on that X, revealed myself publicly. I could have stayed anonymous and told the truth. I would have stayed at NSA, making an incredible amount of money for very little work, spying on you, spying on everyone in America, and violating the rights of our democratic republic. But even though it has cost me a lot, I believe it was the right thing to do, and I'd be willing to do it again, no matter what happens to me.
You recently said to Katie Couric, if we want to be in a better America, we have to do it ourselves. And in your view, what's the most important thing an individual in this country can do?
Well, I mean, the first thing is to care. It's getting easier and easier to try to withdraw within ourselves, within our families, within our homes. A lot of people have very tough lives. They work hard. They've got multiple jobs. They get home at night. They don't want to think about politics. They don't want to think about the problems that we're all facing. They just want to watch their shows, forget for a few hours before they have to get up in the next morning and do it all over again. But I think we should consider that that's something that disempowers us. That's not only a theft from the future, from your children and generations that will come afterwards, that's a theft from you, because you're giving up on the idea that tomorrow could be better. You're giving up on the idea that if you stand up and say something about the fact that this isn't right, that things could be better, that you don't necessarily have to work, 3 jobs and pay, $20,000 a year for daycare or something crazy like that. You don't have to live in a country where every time you dial the phone, you have to worry about what it's going to look like in a database. You don't want to be in the kind of world where everything you type into a Google search box is known forever and shared with God knows who. We can build that. But it's not enough to believe in something. It's not enough to visualize that better world. You actually have to stand up for it. You have to risk something. You have to dare. You have to actually act, coordinate, talk to the people around you, organize. And if you don't have time, right, if you simply can't, if you've tried and there's no way to do that and somehow still manage to have enough hours in the day to do everything you need to do, give resources to those who can. Invest some part of yourself, whether it's your money, whether it's your time, whether it's making phone calls, into organizations that actually will fight to make that better, more fair, more free world. Help the ACLU, help the Electronic Frontier Foundation, help the Freedom of the Press Foundation, help Human Rights Watch, Amnesty International. Do something to make sure the rights that generations of Americans fought and died for, the rights that we fought a war to realize, we fought a revolution over this, don't disappear from history, from this election or any other.
From Twitter, @Wolverink asks, with technology developing and evolving, what's the thing you're most worried about in terms of both surveillance and in general?
This is this is kind of sprawling and challenging. I think what we're looking at is this idea of a quantified world where everything you do is generating records. When you think about the advance of technology, it's always outpaced our ability to regulate it because technology moves faster than Congresses do, than parliaments do. This is not to say technology is a bad thing. Technology is a very good thing. Technology is the reason why we can cure many diseases. Technology is the reason that we can live lives of the quality that we do today. Technology is the reason that you can have a cold drink in your refrigerator. But technology can have unintended consequences. In previous generations, when we figured out atomic sciences, nuclear physics, we found out how to split the atom and release energy. Now, this thing could be used to turn the lights on over a city, or they could be used to turn the lights out over entire nations, or perhaps even the planet. And this was the nuclear moment, the atomic moment of physics in the last century, where an idea, a technology that we created to improve the lives of everyone had suddenly been used to threaten them. The freedom and safety that we once enjoyed now existed under a kind of sword of Damocles, the idea of mutually assured destruction. One politician has a bad day, hits the red button, bam, it's the end of everything as we understand it. We're living through the atomic moment of computer science today. The same technologies that are being used to connect us, to tie us together, to let you listen to this right now, are also being used to make records about your activity. It happens invisibly. It happens without your awareness. Yes, there are a lot of sites that say, well, we have a user policy where when you create an account, you get that gigantic wall of legal text that says you have to click OK. Nobody reads those. And in fact, there have been studies done that have said, even if you wanted to, nobody could read those. You encounter more of those legal agreements in a year than there are moments and hours to actually read all of them. But it's simpler than that. It's the idea of, is technology going to empower us or is it going to disempower us? And the idea is that recording the activities of someone is creating vulnerabilities for them. If you are being tracked, this is something that you should agree to. This is something you should understand. This is something you should be aware of and be able to change at any time. If records are being created about your activities, particularly when they don't enjoy the normal legal protections that one might expect. In the United States, this is a legal problem that's kind of discussed as content versus metadata. Content is what you say on the phone, which you might consider to be the more sensitive part. Metadata is the fact that you made a phone call, who it was to, how long it was for. That metadata part of it is actually, in many cases, much more dangerous and much more intrusive because it can be understood by machines at scale. This is how the NSA monitored the social connections of everyone in the United States by collecting that metadata. Because unfortunately, it doesn't have the same kind of legal protections that you would expect. The police don't need a warrant to get your metadata from a phone company. They don't need a warrant to get your metadata, in many cases, from a technology company. And this is a very, very dangerous thing. But why? Why does it matter and why is it so risky, right? You might go, I don't really care if people know who I call. But it's not just who you call. That's the one example we use to break it down because it's simple. It's everyone you've ever called forever, when you called them. It's where you called them from. It's what you paid for. It's every border you crossed, every purchase you make, every email you sent, every website you visited, everywhere your phone traveled. These things are creating records about you, activity records about you. that are far more granular, far more detailed, and far more complete than any team of surveillance agents, any team of covert agency operators could create on anyone, even if they all work together just to watch one person. But they don't actually have to target you anymore. This happens automatically. It happens without anybody doing anything at all. It just happens because that's how computers work. These records are things that never would have existed in previous generations. When we go back to that general warrant idea from before, why did the colonists care so much about this, that they would actually be willing to risk their lives over what seems like, governments doing investigations into things that they say are serious? Well, throughout human history, human communications have been ephemeral. Ephemeral means, they disappear, they sort of evaporate when they're done. You talk to somebody, the only people who knows that it happened were you and the people that you talked to. It wasn't recorded when you visited the store. It wasn't recorded when you went to church. There was no record of the kind of magazines you bought, the kind of things that you looked at the library that was universally available. Who you were, what you thought, your ideas, your beliefs, your future, your hopes, your dreams belonged to you. Increasingly, these things belong to companies, and these companies can share them however they want without a lot of oversight. In many cases, we aren't even aware that they have this power over us. This is the central problem of the future, is how do we return control over our identities to the people themselves, the people who those identities belong to. This isn't to say companies can't provide services. This isn't to say, you can't have a login or a tweet or anything like that. This isn't to say you can't store history on some website somewhere. But the people who need to be in control of that are the users and no one else.
From Melanie Sharp, 42, what pieces of literature have moved you, stuck with you for life? And more broadly, what's influenced you? What inspires you?
This is a this is a fascinating question. I don't get this one very much. I'd like to give kind of book titles, but as a privacy advocate, I think that's actually the wrong take here. I think there's nothing that says more about a person than the books that they prize, the things that they treasure. Because these are the ideas that they kind of embody. These are their dreams printed out. Instead, I'll say something that is similar but a little bit different. I'm a reader. There are few things I enjoy more than having the time to go through a book. But I'm also a child of the internet. I'm part of that first generation who grew up connected, who could reach out and see anything. And this means that I didn't just read books, and I still don't just read books in the traditional sense. I read from a book that never ends. We're writing a book together all the time in all of these different communities, and we are the authors of a new story that reaches every human heart in every corner of the earth. And yeah, there have been things that are of particular influence about me. I can think of nothing that has held more influence for me personally than the internet itself.
And as a final question and final thought, Jacob Young at JRYIO, Snowden, how do you make sure current and future generations never treat government surveillance as normal?
The normalization of anything, whether it's surveillance or injustice, inequality, is going to be a challenge. Because ultimately, as individuals, we have a smaller voice than these huge institutions. What we need to do is we need to, first off, explain what it is that we believe and share it, debate it, figure out what matters and why. Within our families, within our communities, around the Thanksgiving table, at Christmas, without ruining it. We have enough. We have enough of that. Don't want to be that guy. But to recognize that it's not just about surveillance, right? A lot of people think about 2013 and they think about, oh, the NSA, they're spying on us. And it's true, they are. But that's not the issue. Surveillance is a global problem. And it's only the smallest part of the issue. What we're actually talking about is democracy. What we're talking about is civil empowerment. What we're talking about is the relationship between the governing and the governed, the ordinary citizens. There's been an increasing imbalance of power where that idea of private citizens and public officials has been inverted, where instead of them knowing very little about us and us knowing very much about them, now they have classification, now they have state secrets, they can hide behind their power. We know almost nothing about what public officials are doing. Again, we can't even see their tax returns. If we look at private citizens, now they're being monitored by everyone. They have almost no privacy. How do we revert that? How do we correct that? How do we restore the balance of power there? Is a difficult question. When we lose control, when we lose our influence over the passage of laws in our country, when every law that's passed seems to work against us rather than for us, do we need to seek new means of enforcing human rights? Maybe. The law is important, and we need legal protections. But we need to start thinking about things not just in the national context, not just in the local context, but in the global context. Can we correct things just in the United States without also correcting things for everybody else? In a lot of contexts, no. But in the context of technology, maybe. Because of the borderless context of the internet, and people are trying to stop this. They're threatened by the idea of a borderless internet. But as long as our protocols, as long as our standards can reach everywhere, data can be encrypted and transmitted without knowing the content of it, without knowing, in some cases, its origin and destination. We can start creating a fabric of freedom that provides human rights, not just freedom of speech, not just the right to privacy to Americans, but to Russians, to people in China, to people in Iran, North Korea, Germany, France, Brazil, anywhere. And we can do this at the flip of a switch. If we create one technological leap that solves one of these difficult problems, such as how do we have private communications, protected communications, confidential communications between families, between friends, between a newspaper and its readers that can't be intercepted, that can't be censored, that can't be controlled, that can go anywhere on Earth, we've started to figure out how to solve some of those problems by a new means that never existed before. We're facing problems that never existed before. So I think it's fair to consider that we might need to use technology to create solutions that we've never seen before.
Thank you, Edward, for all your time, your care, and also your voice. And thanks for joining us today. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thanks for inviting me to speak. And thank you for Twitter.
Thank you. Have a great day.